Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Cal Poly Pomona University Library's Adult Storytime series. Today, we're going to read A Cargo of Cat by Ambrose Bierce. Ambrose Bierce was born in 1842 in rural Ohio. And when I say rural Ohio, I'm not kidding. The man was literally born in a log cabin in what is described as a particular county in Ohio. There is no town nearby. In 1861, he enlisted in the Union Army, and he saw action at the Battle of Shiloh in 1862, and was severely wounded in 1864 at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. He is famous for a number of things, including his weird and satirical writing, including the Devil's Dictionary, which is a rather biting satire of all society around him, and an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which many of you may be familiar with because we forced you to read it during high school. He also wrote a number of horror short stories and actually wrote some just straight-up recollections of his life in the Army during the Civil War, one of which I may read for you sometime in the future because it's kind of impressive. Perhaps the other truly noteworthy thing about Bierce is the way he died, or the fact that we don't really know how he died. In 1914, feeling somewhat restless, he went down to Mexico, which was in the midst of the Mexican Revolution at that time, claiming to want to work as a journalist to go and see what was going on down there. He wrote one final letter sometime in 1914 in Mexico and was never seen or heard from again. It is assumed that one of the various sides in the revolution shot and killed him, but it is unclear who it was who was responsible. His body was never recovered. So, there you go. So, without further ado, we will read for you this short story, A Cargo of Cat, which was first published as Bee in the San Francisco Wasp on January 3rd, 1885. On the 16th day of June, 1874, the ship Mary Jane sailed from Malta, heavily laden with cat. This cargo gave us a good deal of trouble. It was not in bales, but had been dumped into the hold loose. Captain Doble, who had once commanded a ship that carried coals, said he felt that this planned the best. When the hold was full of cat, the hatch was battened down, and we felt good. Unfortunately, the mate, thinking the cats would be thirsty, introduced a hose into one of the hatches and pumped in a considerable quantity of water, and the cats of the lower levels were all drowned. You've seen a dead cat in a pond? You remember its circumference at the waist. Water multiplies the multitude of a dead cat by 10. On the first day out, it was observed that the ship was much strained. She was 3 feet wider than usual and as much as 10 feet shorter. The convexity of her deck was visibly augmented fore and aft, and she turned up at both ends. Her rudder was clean out of the water, and she would answer the helm only when running directly against a strong breeze. The rudder, when perverted to one side, would rub against the wind and slew her around, and she wouldn't steer any more. Owing to the curvature of her keel, the masts came together at the top, and a sailor who had gone up the foremast got bewildered and came down the mizzenmast, looked out over the stern at the receding shores of Malta, and shouted, "Land ho!" The ship's fastenings were all giving way. The water on each side was lashed to foam by the tempest of flying bolts that she shed at every pulsation of the cargo. She was quietly wrecking herself without assistance from wind or wave, by the sheer internal energy of feline expansion. I went to the skipper about it. He was in his favorite position, sitting on the deck, supporting his back against the binnacle, making a V of his legs and smoking. "Captain Doble," I said, respectfully touching my hat, which was generally not worthy of respect. "This floating palace is afflicted with curvature of the spine, and is likewise greatly swollen." Without raising his eyes, he courteously acknowledged my presence by knocking the ashes from his pipe. "Permit me, Captain," I said, with simple dignity, "to repeat that the ship is much swollen." "If that is true," said the gallant mariner, reaching for his tobacco pouch, "I think it would be as well to swab her down with liniment. There's a bottle of it in my cabin. Better suggest it to the mate." "But, Captain, there is no time for empirical treatment. Some of the planks at the waterline have started." The skipper rose and looked out over the stern toward the land. He fixed his eyes on the foaming wake. He gazed into the water to starboard and to port and said, "My friend, the whole damn thing has started." Sadly and silently, I turned from that obdurate man and walked forward. Suddenly, there was a burst of thunder sound. The hatch that had held down the cargo was flung whirling into space and sailed in the air like a blown leaf. Pushing upward through the patchway was a smooth, square column of cat. Grandly and impressively it grew. Slowly, serenely, majestically it rose toward the welkin, the relaxing keel partly at the mastheads to give it a fair chance. I have stood at Naples and seen Vesuvius painting the town red. From Catania I have remarked afar on the flanks of Etna the lava's awful pursuit of the astonished rooster and despairing pig. The fiery flow from Kilauea's crater, thrusting itself into the forests and licking the entire country clean, is as familiar to me as my mother tongue. I have seen glaciers 1,000 years old and quite bald, heading for a valley full of tourists at the rate of an inch a month. I have seen a saturated solution of a mining camp going down a mountain river to make a sociable call on the valley farmers. I have stood behind a tree on the battlefield and seen a compact square mile of armed men, moving with irresistible momentum to the rear. Whenever anything grand in magnitude or motion is billed to appear, I commonly manage to beat my way into the show, and, in reporting it, I am a man of unscrupulous veracity. But I have seldom observed anything like that solid gray column of Maltese cat. It is unnecessary to explain, I suppose, that each individual grimalkin in the outfit, with that readiness of resource that distinguishes the species, had grappled with tooth and nail as many others as it could hook on to. This preserved the formation. It made the column so stiff that when the ship rolled, and the Mary Jane was a devil to roll, it swayed from side to side like a mast, and the mate said that if it grew much taller he would have to order it cut away or it would capsize us. Some of the sailors went to work at the pumps, but these discharged nothing but fur. Captain Doble raised his eyes from his toes and shouted, "Let go the anchor!" But being assured that nobody was touching it, apologized and resumed his reverie. The chaplain said that if there were no objections he would like to offer up a prayer, and a gambler from Chicago, producing a pack of cards, proposed to throw round for the first jack. The parson's plan was adopted, and as he uttered the final amen, the cats struck up a hymn. All the living ones were now above deck, and every mother's son of them sang. Each had a pretty fair voice, but no ear. Nearly all their notes in the upper register were more or less cracked and disobedient. The remarkable thing about the voices was their range. In that crowd were cats of 17 octaves, and the range could not have been less than 12. Now, if you consider the number of cats per invoice were 127,000, and the estimated dead swellers were only 6,000, this meant that the total number of cats singing was 121,000, and that the average number of octaves per cat was 12, then the total octaves being sung in this choir was 1,452,000. It was a great concert. It lasted 3 days and nights, or counting each night as 7 days, 24 days altogether, and we could not go below for provisions. At the end of that time the cook came forward, shaking some beans in a hat and holding a large knife. "Shipmates," said he, "we've done all that mortals can do. Let us now draw lots." We were blindfolded in turn and drew, but just as the cook was forcing the fatal black bean upon the fattest man, the concert closed with a suddenness that waked the man in the lookout. A moment later, every grimalkin released his hold on his neighbors, the column lost its cohesion, and with 121,000 dull, thickening thuds that beat as one, the whole business fell to the deck. Then, with a wild farewell wail, the feline host sprang spitting into the sea and struck southward for the African shore. The southern extension of Italy, as every schoolboy knows, resembles in shape an enormous boot. We had drifted within sight of it. The cats in the fabric had spied it, and their alert imaginations were instantly affected with a lively sense of the size, weight, and probable momentum of its flung bootjack. And that is the end of A Cargo of Cat by Ambrose Bierce.